Hello, guys and gals, and welcome to another episode of our Skills and Abilities. That was the SpongeBob Rainbow, by the way. If you have imagination, you would have seen it. Today, we're going to be talking about another Paladin aura. This is in the defensive tree, and this one is called Defiance. Now, Defiance is a rather simple ability. It gives you defense. And a lot of people would say, well, that's not really that great. And, well, you know, it's not. To use, anyway. The problem with defensive auras is that, well, they kind of make you too defensive. Like, if you live in a castle and you've got big high walls, I mean, that's cool and all, but it'd be nice to have a catapult to shoot over those walls, you know, maybe some harpoon guns and some boiling oil to pour down, you know. You need some offensive with the defensive. You can't just be defensive. Well, Defiance is one of those abilities that you generally won't see a Paladin using, and it has to do with the fact that, well, there's better auras around. It's not because Defiance is bad, but it's more or less just, well, there's better stuff that you could be putting on your character. Now, there are items in the game that actually have Defiance aura on them. One of them in particular, or rather the only one in particular that has Defiance aura on it, is the Paladin rune word known as... I'm having a brain fart here. Dang, I can't remember the name of the shield. It's a 4-socket shield, and it has some pretty nice effects on it, including repairs durability, which makes it something that you want to make an ethereal base. And this particular shield does have the Defiance aura on it, which means that you can get Defiance for free if you're using that particular shield. The problem with Exile, though, is that it's kind of expensive, and it tends to be a little bit hard to obtain the right base for, as finding an ethereal 45 all-res elite base can generally take you quite some time. There's also one other way that you can manage to get the aura, which is the Act 2 mercenary. So if you are utilizing an Act 2 mercenary, you can get a Defiance mercenary. Now, the Defiance mercenary does have a pretty decent level of Defiance at level 18, and it will increase your defense quite nicely. There is some important caveats about the increase in defense. So the increase of defense is only going to increase your base. Now, this is really important because a lot of people get confused with defense increases, and they think that they're going to increase the number that's written on the screen no matter what. But that's not how it works. So, for instance, if I cast my Holy Shield, which my Holy Shield is currently level 14, it gives me a 220% defense increase. This defense increase brings me up to 4,371 at this particular moment. When I walk outside and I let the Defiance aura hit me, it's not going to modify the 4,371. Instead, it's going to modify the base number, and it's going to give me a decent amount of damage, a decent amount of defense from that base number. So as you can see, I went up to 7,649, which is certainly not 220% of 4,371. It's 220% of my base number, which was 1,379. So both the Holy Shield and the Defiance aura are both affecting the base number, not the total. And all defense mechanics actually work this way. So Iron Skin from the Barbarian, Shout from the Barbarian, Holy Shield from the Paladin, Defiance from the Paladin, including the defense increases from Frozen Armor, Chilling Armor, and so forth and so on. Basically, any defense mechanic is never going to increase the total. It only increases the base, which means that you can end up with multiple base increases, which will give you a pretty massive amount of defense overall. But just remember that Defiance isn't actually increasing your total, but just your base. Now, what this does mean is that if you have an item with relatively low defense, like for instance these Laying of Hand Bramble Mitts, they only have 87 defense. But what you'll notice is when I take off 87 defense, my defense goes down by 500, which is kind of ridiculous. So just a mere 87 has a huge effect on my total defense when I'm utilizing multiple defense bonus equipment. So if you have a barbarian or if you have a paladin who's utilizing things like Holy Shield, Defiance, Shout, Iron Skin, maybe even a Chilling Armor proc from a Fortitude. There's a bunch of different ways that you can get bonus defense. Small amounts of increases can actually have a huge overall effect. Like, for instance, String of Ears is a Demon Hide Sash. I could potentially upgrade this to the Spiderweb Sash, which has more defense than the String of Ears. It's not going to necessarily give me a huge amount of defense for my character. But even if it's only about like 40 or 50 defense, if I have multiple bonus effects that help my defense, that 40 will actually translate out to 5, 6, maybe even 1,000 defense, depending on how many other modifiers I currently have. Defiance might not necessarily be the most defensive aura in the Act 2 Mercenary arsenal, though. It's important to talk about the other auras that are more defensive. Yes, and the one particular that stands out is Holy Freeze. Holy Freeze doesn't increase your defense, but what it does do is it slows down the monsters, which makes them attack more infrequently. At 53% slow, most monsters will be kind of ridiculously slow. And it doesn't really matter too much if you have a lot of defense if the monsters, well, are having trouble even swinging their sword, which makes Holy Freeze oftentimes a better defensive choice than the Defiance Mercenary in general. However, if you're in a situation where you have relatively no defense, the Defiance Mercenary might be the better choice. So what do I mean by no defense? Well, let me put it this way. There's a barrier that exists within Diablo. And if you have below that barrier, every single monster that takes a swing at you will probably hit you. And this is a really bad situation to be in Hell difficulty because monsters dish out massive amounts of damage. A lot of people will tell you that defense doesn't matter, and defense is a stat that you don't have to worry about, and it's a garbage stat. And I couldn't disagree more, because defense is actually the one thing that usually ends up preventing you from dying in most situations. If the monster is having trouble hitting you, they often will not kill you. And this specifically goes for physical damage attacks, generally physical melee and physical ranged attacks. So it's not going to help you versus elemental damage. For that, you're going to have to lean on your resistances, damage reduction abilities, things like that. But for physical damage attacks, for melee attacks and ranged attacks, defense has one of the best effects on your survivability. Usually, if you have about 4,000 defense in Hell difficulty or higher, you're usually in a good situation. If you have about 3,000 or less, you're usually getting hit by just about every monster that tries to hit you. And this can lead to very bad things. Now, what bad things can this cause? Well, first off, let's look at what defense does. So defense doesn't reduce the damage you take. It reduces the % chance that a monster will hit you. If a monster hits you, there's a good chance that he can trigger a faster hit recovery stun. Faster hit recovery stuns are the #1 reason why characters like sorceresses, even paladins or any other characters tend to die, because they get stuck in what's called a faster hit recovery loop. More defense generally means less faster hit recovery stuns, because you're not getting hit. If you're not getting hit, you're not taking damage. If you're not taking damage, you're not losing HP. If you're not losing HP, you're not getting a faster hit recovery stun procced on you. And if you don't get faster hit recovery stuns procced on you, then there's a very good chance you're not going to get a second one procced on you and end up in a loop. For mercenaries specifically, they tend to have horrible faster hit recovery, and so increasing their defense decreases the number of faster hit recovery stuns that they take, and overall increases their survivability quite drastically. And having something like Defiance on a mercenary will actually increase the survivability of your mercenary pretty ridiculously, especially if you combine it with other items that increase defense, like Fortitude, which give chilling armor, Fade from Treachery, which gives a very nice physical damage reduction, including resistances, curse reduction, and all sorts of other things, and as well as items that reduce, the duration of poisons, like cleansing and stuff like that. All of this combined together basically means your mercenary will be a lot tankier. Now, why run Defiance instead of any other mercenary? Well, the answer to that question is well, everybody runs Might mercenaries, and everybody runs Holy Freeze mercenaries. So if you're in a group setting, generally nobody's running a Defiance mercenary because they all want to protect themselves, right? So it's a actual good option to pick for a group, because in a group setting, you're going to now be providing an aura which nobody else is providing, and so there's less overlap. But if you're by yourself, you might want to choose the Holy Freeze aura instead, and this is why you see a lot of people choosing those instead. All in all, Defiance is one of those weird abilities that just doesn't really have a lot of practical use within the game, because it doesn't provide something beneficial over, fanaticism or conviction or concentration. So it's not necessarily that Defiance is a bad aura. It's more so that it's not better than the alternative choices. Another thing about Defiance is it also is a synergy. So Holy Shield, which offers a pretty massive defense bump, actually has a synergy of 15% increased defense per level with Defiance, which means that you can get a total of 300% increased defense by using Defiance with Holy Shield. So if you level up Holy Shield and you level up Defiance together, you get a pretty massive, I think it's 700% increased defense from Holy Shield, which can bring you to insane levels of defense, to the point where literally most monsters within the game probably won't be hitting you or touching you if it's a physical or a melee attack, melee or ranged attack of some kind. If defense is involved in the equation, you're probably not going to get touched. The last thing I think we should go over, though, is running. So I actually have an entire video on this, why running is actually the enemy, and a lot of people don't realize this, is that your defense, you notice, I have this amazing defense number, right? I put on my Holy Shield, I've got 7,649 defense, but when I'm running, you notice how it goes to line. This means that my defense does not work while I am moving. So while I am running, the defense is 0. So all of that defense, even if you were to build like a Defiance Adin, which is a really weird character, but if you were to build a Defiance Adin and beef Defiance up to the max and get your Holy Shield up to the max and have godlike defense, literally to the point where you're in 20,000 defense and Baal himself can't touch you because your defense is so massive that you're literally just like a walking fortress. Well, guess what? When you run, you ruin all of that massive defense. It's completely gone. So if you do build a really high defense character, if you're looking into a really high defense character, remember that you need to toggle your run button off and walk. Notice now that I'm walking, my defense is not gone anymore. So when you are walking, you do maintain your entire defense pool, and you can be a walking fortress god, but you cannot be a running fortress god. So keep that in mind. In fact, most people in hardcore will actually toggle walk all the time. That's actually a very valid technique, is that whenever you are in a rough situation that you know you are going to be having trouble with, you're going to toggle your walk button, and you're going to toggle it on and off as necessary to save your life. This is also really important for things like the cow level and stuff too. So say you're in the cow level and you're fighting a huge pack of cows. You don't want to run away. You want to walk away. And the reason why you walk away is because if you run, you will die. It's almost instantaneous because your block and your defense go away as soon as you start running. Your block chance gets capped at 25%, and your defense goes away entirely, and you will definitely be hit. To give you an example of this real quick, let's go to Frigid Highlands, and I'm going to show you the difference between a walking paladin As you can see here, I'm blocking the attacks. They're having trouble hitting me. They can't quite dish out the damage that they would otherwise. And then I'm going to show you the difference between a running Paladin. So now I'm going to run. And notice, they're hitting me really hard, and I'm dying. And if I stop running, if I stop moving, they can't really dish out the same amount of damage that they could before. It's a huge defensive mechanic for the characters in this game, is that if you are going to build high defense, you need to make sure that you're not ruining your high defense by running past the monsters. And also, if you do have high defense and you want to get hit, like for instance, let's say you're trying to proc your Fade armor, or you're trying to proc, you know, some other effect that you have on your character, again, you can run past the monsters. So if you're trying to proc an effect, then yes, run around the monsters, kill your defense, kill your block chance, get beat up a little bit, and maybe your effect will proc on the targets. Anyway, as always, I do appreciate you guys and gals watching my videos, even when we talk for 15 minutes on the Defiance aura. And as always, keep watching.